Hi everyone, my name is Carly and you're watching Sewscape. I'm so scared right now. Let's sew this jacket. If you haven't seen the part 1 to this where I'm prepping out this pattern, tracing it, and getting all the pieces ready, click over here and you will see that. And let's get started. So it starts right away with the center back seam and the back vent. So let's just sew it up. Okay guys, I've been sitting here for like half an hour with just decision paralysis and decided to stop watching how-to videos and just to do it. So I sewed up this back seam here until the circle marking point. And so basically on one of the sides, I cut off my seam allowance, folded it along the fold line and folded it again. So this was all parallel with this seam allowance here. And then for the underlap, I folded my seam allowance under, folded it along the fold line, and then left it. And then I am pressing this over this way. So you know the underlap sits under. It's looking really good. And I just clipped into the seam allowance here. I hope that's fine. And then I'm from the right side going to do a top stitch. So I'm going to secure this all with some pins first, and then I'm going to top stitch this from the front and catch all layers. And then I'm probably going to trim off that seam allowance. I don't know if I'm doing this right, but guys, stay with me. You'll find out. So this is what it looks from the right side here. So the underlap is under there. All the edges are nice and finished. So I just marked my little top stitching line here, and I'm really hoping this comes off. This is the water erasable marker. Maybe I should have done the time one, but I did a little test piece and it came off, so hopefully this comes off too. So I'm just gonna take this over to the machine. My pins don't even go through this many layers of fabric, so I'm just gonna wing it, guys. Okay, I'm not gonna lie, I did that 4 times and unpicked it 4 times because my sewing machine was skipping stitches. So I'm gonna zoom in close. I got all the stitches really nice. This vent is sitting perfect. I just love it. It's looking really good. I'm glad I took the time to redo it. The first time I sewed it, the stitches looked good, but I didn't have these sitting just right. So the vent wanted to like pop open, and let me tell you, this is going to be one of, you know, my all-time makes, so I just have to make sure it's just right. So now we move on to the scary part of the front, which is the darts, and we got to cut into some fabric. Okay, I did the first side off camera. It's looking really good, but because it's the first time I'm doing it, it's really scary to take this giant piece of fabric and to cut into it. So I have my dart sewn there, and then I have this cut, and so it says to stitch this by hand with a herringbone stitch together, and that's going to be our welt pocket opening. After watching a few tutorials, some people have just interfaced this with some seam tape, so I'm going to do that. I don't even know what a herringbone stitch is. But yeah, we'll do the other side and just go with it. I have enough fabric, I think, that if I really mess this up, I could probably do it again. So let's do the other side. Alrighty, so this is what it looks like from the back side. The iron, you can see the mark a little bit. So I have just this cotton that I've been using as a pressing cloth here. And then instead of that herringbone stitch, I have just interfaced that. And if we flip this over, this is what it's looking from the front side. So there's my dart. Gotta press that point maybe a little bit more. And then there's my slash line that will eventually be my welt pocket. I'm hoping I did this right, and I'm hoping that those iron marks will come out. You can see them more on camera than you can in real life. Uh-oh. Alrighty, we continue. Let's keep it going. So the next step is these side seams here. So I just have all my notches marked up here. And I'm gonna sew this all down with a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, now we're gonna move on to the welt pocket here. And I'm really nervous, but I'll show you kind of what I have here. So I have my pocket flap, and I have this lined up with this mark that I made. Mine is 6.5 inches long, and that's the exact length of this flap. And then the welt goes about 1/2 inch over on either side. So I just have that mark. That's going to be the end of my stitching line. And we're going to sew this up, and then we cut it open and see how it looks. Hi guys, it's the next day, and so yesterday I got all the really tricky parts of the jacket sewn. My welt pockets are not perfect, but I'm really scared to unpick the suede, and because it's kind of all cut, I don't want to do too much damage to it. So I think I'm just gonna have to like live with it a little bit and be like, okay, these were my first real welt pockets, and yes, I did them in suede. And I don't think anyone's gonna notice. A lot of the mistakes are more so on the inside rather than on the outside, but there was some kind of like waving of the fabric. I don't know, from the pressing, but I might put a damp cloth on top of the suede, and that might help like reset it. You know what I mean? Like maybe it's just, maybe I did too much ironing. Anyways, so now with all the pockets done, it's time to attach the facings together. So the back facing to the front facing, sew up those shoulder seams, and then attach it to the jacket, which is a nice easy task after those welt pockets. So I can't wait to start doing that first. So I'm gonna sew up those side seams, or their shoulder seams. All right, so in the instructions for the collar and the facing, it says sew on the facing and then slip the collar in between the facing and the garment. And I feel like that's like doing too much, you know what I mean? So I'm thinking I'm just gonna base the collar to the garment first and then sew the facing on so they're all sandwiched together. So that's my plan. Hi guys, it's officially the next night. So last night my camera battery, all of them died. So I did a little bit of work on my jacket off camera, and so I ended up sewing the facing in, and it looks really good. I find it difficult to press this suede, and I feel like it might look better with a top stitch, but I don't think I want to top stitch it. So I'm just gonna leave it as is and see how it wears. And then I might like go in and top stitch it at a later date. We will see. So I have that all done, and then it turns out I missed a step. Literally in the first, like instruction number 1 was like sew the back to the sides and then sew the side seams up, and I didn't do that until right now. So I sewed that up, I tried it on. It is looking so awesome. And so now I am going to read the instructions. I think I'm pressing the hem up but not sewing it in yet. So that is what I'm gonna do. So I gave myself 1.5 inches of seam allowance on this to fold up, but I'm really liking like how dramatic and long it is. So I think I'm only gonna fold up 1 inch and just keep it as long as possible. so it's been a while since you've seen my face on here. It's been a while that I've been working on this coat. I think this is the longest I've ever worked on a sewing project. Excuse my wet hair once again. By the end of this video, it should be dry and fluffy again. But today we're finishing the coat. So I have been doing some little, I've been doing some work on the coat in the evenings, and the light just hasn't been very good to film exact steps. So I'll kind of explain to you what I was doing. So I think the last thing that I was talking you guys through was I was setting in the sleeves. So I set in the sleeves and realized I caught some of the edge of the bodice in the sleeve. So I do have some holes that I had to unpick. Unfortunately, you can see it from the right side, but it's fine. I'm happy with it. I had some puckering on the sleeves too. So I unpicked that and just made it super smooth. And at this point, once I had the sleeves on, I tried it on and I was like, oh my gosh, this kind of looks like a burlap sack. Like, I'm not super excited about it. None of the seams are really neat. It's kind of looking blah. So I was looking for a way that I could finish my seams a bit neater so they pressed better. So I looked online, how can I make my suede seams look better? And the two options it said was to top stitch every seam, which I wasn't doing. I'm like, this is not the vibe that I'm going for. And then the other option was to use a fusible webbing to fuse all the seams. So I did that. So I went over every seam allowance on the jacket, all the arms, everything, and I put that fusible web in. So I used the Stitch Witchery. I'll show you it right here. I think it's called Stitch Witchery. It's this right here. And what I did for the seam allowance, because this is 5/8 of an inch, I cut this in half just with my rotary cutter and then stuck it under the seams. And then it said to press with a wet or a damp pressing cloth on the wool setting, and then to check the seams if they stuck down. And it looks really good. It made everything sit so neat. I wish I had done this before when I had been doing the collar. So I unpicked the collar a little bit and tried to like shove some of this around all the corners to get that nice crisp seam in there. It's not super great. The collar could have used more, and then the pocket flaps too. I'm like, oh, this would have been so good to have earlier. But now I'm reinvigorated. I'm ready to finish this project. It's looking so cute. I want to wear this like tomorrow. So, but I'm not gonna rush it. I've taken so much time with this that I really want to make sure it is just right. And I'm trying to be kind to myself and tell myself, okay, this is the first time I'm making something like this, and the fabric that I'm doing, because I can't unpick it, it's been a difficult go. So yeah, I'm being kind to myself. It's okay if it's not perfect. It's still gonna be a wicked coat. So now I'm gonna move on to the lining. That is the next step. I should also mention, I pressed up the hem with this because this is fusible hemming tape. And so instead of hand sewing, I just glued her down because the suede is so thick that even with a sewing needle, it's really hard to get through. So I don't know what I'm gonna do when I have to attach the lining to it. I'm gonna try to hand sew it. I did one of the sleeves with the fusible, and then I realized when I traced the pattern, when you trace the hem allowance of a sleeve, so sleeves kind of taper in like this. And if you follow that taper when you're tracing your seam allowance, when you fold it in, it's gonna be a smaller distance than the outside of the garment. So one of them ended up being a wrinkle, so I pulled it off quick before the webbing could really fuse, and I'm gonna have to hand sew that, but I'm gonna do it later. I'm gonna sew all the lining today and then sew that lining into the coat, and then tonight, probably with a movie on, I'm gonna do all this hand sewing with a thick thimble on my fingers so I don't hurt myself, because this fabric is so heavyweight. So I'm gonna start with my lining pieces. So I'm gonna start by sewing the darts in the lining. All right, so now I sewed the darts, and then I sewed that center back seam until the notch at the bottom where the vent is. So I'm gonna press this open before I sew the pleats, and then I'm going to sew the back to the side seams and then the front to the side seams, and then we'll work on the sleeves. So I don't mind, I have this old beach towel just really thick on here underneath my pressing, and that was more for the suede. I was finding I was crushing it, and when I was doing the adhesive, this made it so I could really apply steam and it didn't affect the garment. So I have, this is the lining, the center back of the lining. I've sewed up those pleats and they're looking so good. All right, now we can sew the side seams onto the side panels. So I have all my side seams sewn together. Now I'm gonna sew up my shoulder seams, and then I'm gonna move on to the sleeves. And the sleeve construction is exactly the same as on the garment, so I'm not gonna show you guys that. I'm gonna do that off camera. And so we're just gonna sew up kind of the sleeve, the two sleeve seams, and then ease it in. So I'll show you once the lining is all done. So in true Sewscape fashion, I did not film the rest of putting together the lining. Here instead is a clip of me sewing the lining to the jacket itself. At this point, I'm just so excited to get finished this jacket, and I've put so much effort into it that I just can't wait to show you guys. This has been such an awesome project, and thank you guys for coming along in this journey with me. So I really love how this turned out. The process for me was really difficult, and I feel like my jaw is still sore from like clenching it as I'm sewing through all these difficult parts. I find my fabric choice, although I love the finished result, was really difficult to work with, because if I made a mistake, it was in there for good. Once there's a hole in suede, you can't get rid of the hole. So I only had to unpick a couple areas that were seen, and I do notice the holes, but I think I can survive. I can sleep at night with the way that they are. My welt pockets, I would give a 7 out of 10. When they're closed, they look great, but when you open them, they look not that great. And I feel like if this was an article of clothing that I washed in the washing machine, that maybe I didn't catch all the layers of the corners, or maybe I caught too many layers and it would be fine, but I feel like going through the washing machine and the agitation, the pockets might come undone. I also feel like my sewing machine did not love sewing this thick of fabric, especially when it was like 3 or 4 layers of it all together. So I feel like I would get a more heavy duty needle next time. I was using a size, I think 90/14. And if I went again, I would get maybe a size 100, and I feel like that would be better. I almost picked some up last night, but I'm like, hey, I got 3 more needles to do this buttonhole. That's all I have left to sew. Hand sewing was also really difficult. I feel like all my fingers are so sore from pushing the needle through the fabric. I had to get some more heavy duty needles because every one that I put through just was snapping. I snapped one right in half, and yeah. My husband thought it was ridiculous, but he reminded me as I was going through and hand sewing and cursing the world, he was like, enjoy it. take time, take pride. And I'm like, you're right. Like, I put so much time and effort into this jacket. I don't want to like speed through the end. So all the markings came off with my water soluble pen, which was a total win. Yeah, I just really love how this turned out, and I hope it stays in my wardrobe for a long time. The lining is so fun. I wore it to work today for the first time and got tons of compliments on it. So thank you guys for coming along with me on this journey. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button if you want to see more videos like this. And I hope you guys have the best day. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.